The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Wait, first off, hang on. How do you like my new shirt? I love the shirt. Brilliant. Got it off Etsy. AB Pralin is the name of the shop on Etsy if you want this. It's really hot. It's really hot. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. How do you know when something becomes... Oh! I forgot my tea. It's not a tea, it's a matcha latte. Anyway, how do you know when something becomes a favourite thing of yours? Like, when it broaches favourite territory. Like, how do you know? Par exemple, when I was a kid, my two favourite video games were Final Fantasy IX and Kingdom Hearts 1. And they still are. They're still two of my favourite games. Maybe nostalgia plays a part in that, I don't know. And then when I was about 25, I just moved to Shanghai and Bloodborne came out. And I played Bloodborne. I couldn't find a copy for ages because I was in China, but then I did. And I played Bloodborne and I had the feeling that I'd not had since I was a kid. This specific feeling of hype and excitement and raw pleasure that I hadn't had from a video game in years. Even though I played them all the time, I felt like a kid again, even though Bloodborne is this dark, gloomy, Lovecraftian horror nightmare. I still felt it, so now I put that in my top 3, so I've got a top 3 now. But I'm wondering if The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is one of my new favourite novels. My favourite novel is Frankenstein. My favourite novel in translation from another language is Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, which is a Japanese novel. And I think now I'm going to have to bracket this as potentially my new favourite contemporary novel. Or my favourite piece of genre fiction? I'm not sure. I love it. I love it to pieces. So The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is by V.E. Schwab. V.E. Schwab is an American writer who I think lives in Edinburgh. Good choice, Edinburgh's awesome. Shout out to Lighthouse Bookshop in Edinburgh. I've never read any of her books before, even though she's got this Neil Gaiman-esque urban fantasy quality to her that I think I would really enjoy. I've just kind of put off reading her for a while because I haven't read much fantasy in the last few years. But then I got this for my birthday and it is wonderful. This is my first V.E. Schwab book and it will not be my last. I am in love with Addie LaRue and her story. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. More like The Incredible Life of Addie LaRue. Good title suggestion, Will. That's a good title. You should use that. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is a faustian story. It tells the story of a woman who was born in the late 17th century France in a village called Villon. At the beginning of the book, her parents have matched her up with a local village boy and she's going to get married and she's like in her early 20s at this point. And so she runs off into the woods and makes a pact with an old god. There's a strange kind of witchy woman in the village who shuns Christ and God and Christian stuff and instead embraces the old kind of pagan gods that she grew up with. Her name is Estelle and she tells Addie, or Adeline, about these old gods, and so Addie runs out into the woods on her wedding day and tries to make a pact with a god. Estelle has warned her not to make a pact with a god after dark, and the sun is just setting and Addie isn't paying attention and she calls out to these gods on this crossroads and is like, please save me from this nightmare of a life. And this dark devil kind of god appears. He's referred to as the Shadow, and later she calls him Luke, short for Lucifer. They make a deal, and Addie's deal is that she will live an invisible life, and she requests that she live this life until she doesn't want it anymore. So she is now effectively immortal. She will continue to live at the age of 20-something forever until she's kind of bored of this life. The downside is that no one can remember her. People lay eyes on her, they introduce themselves, they ask her name. She cannot speak her own name anymore, so she has to invent a name. And then as soon as people walk away from her, they forget they've ever seen her. Photos and videos cannot be taken of her. She is invisible. The book then flits back and forth between her time in her early years of this invisible life, kind of the first 50 years, which is set in France, mostly in Paris, and the present-day New York City, where she meets someone. This someone is given away in the blurb. His name is Henry, and he works in this secondhand bookshop in Manhattan. Or is it Brooklyn? Can't remember. Anyway, his name's Henry, and he's 29, I think, and he remembers her. Not from the past. When I read the blurb, it says he remembers her, and I thought that meant he remembered her from 100 years ago or something. It just means he doesn't forget her. Because Addie survives by just going around and stealing things. She goes into a restaurant and orders a meal and eats it. When the waiter's back is turned, she just walks out, and the waiter forgets there was anyone sat there at all. And now... Oh my god, the cat wants to come in. Oh my god, this cat is an absolute nightmare when it comes to filming, even though she's my favourite thing in the world and I would die for her. So now, Addie is in this bookshop, and this guy Henry, she steals a book, and Henry's like, hey, you're going to pay for that? Like, he chases her out onto the street, and he's like, hey, you're going to pay for that? And she's blindsided because this doesn't happen. Right, sit there and look pretty. So she's like, oh, yeah, sure, I'll pay for that book. Yeah, sorry. Then she's able to tell him her name, and things develop, but I won't tell you anymore because I guess that's a spoiler. See, I can't drink my matcha latte now because I have you. Okay. I don't know if it's worth bringing up, but it's too hot in here for me to put a light on my face, so I'm using natural light. That's why everything is kind of overexposed, including the cat. Ow. Where was I? So the narrative of Addie LaRue jumps back and forth between her early years and present-day New York City. I can't really tell you anything more about it because everything else would be a spoiler, and it's a long book. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is 540 pages, so it's a decent-sized brick of a book, and it's almost perfect. The first thing that I really loved about this book is the fact that it flits around between genres. It's a Faustian story. Faust is referenced in it. V.E. Schwab doesn't ignore the fact that this is a Faustian tale. It is brought up, it is referenced by other characters, and at one point she's in New York City and a guy is putting on a play of Dr. Faustus, and he's, have you heard of it? And Addie's like, yeah, no, I've heard of it, yeah. It's also a mystery story because there's something about Henry that we don't know. That's very clear from the beginning, it's clear from the blurb. Why does Henry remember her? And that story gets progressively unveiled as it goes, and it's very exciting. It's also a love story because you know that Addie and Henry's relationship is going to blossom and continue to blossom as it goes. It's also a kind of a piece of historical fiction. So much of this book is set in 18th and 19th century France, and it also goes to a few other places as well that I won't spoil. It's a pretty detailed at times piece of historical fiction. It has references to wars and revolutions. You know that Addie is going to live through the French Revolution, and you're excited to see what it will look like from her perspective. So this blend of genres and fairy tale-esque Faustian stories is just, it's so juicy and tasty and yummy, and I loved it. What also carries the story is Addie herself. Neil Gaiman had a thing that he said about the book, which was, for someone damned to be forgettable, Addie LaRue is a most delightful, unforgettable character, and her story is the most joyous evocation of unlikely immortality. Yeah, well done, Neil Gaiman. That's a good way to put that. She is a wholly lovable character, but she's also flawed. For someone who has lived for 300 and something years, she's not perfect, and she is troubled. And her relationship with Luke, the demon who has cursed her, is ongoing. Luke plagues her life. He pops up now and again. He makes a lot of deals with a lot of people, and he checks in on them now and again, and he checks in on her, and he is fascinated by her. He's obsessed with her. As the story goes, you realize that the reason that she won't give in and give up her life and admit that she's bored and troubled, because it is a torturous life being forgotten and invisible. It is torturous. But the reason that she keeps going is that she just has this bloody-minded agenda to not let him win. It is explicitly told that she will not give up her immortal life, even though it's causing her so much misery and trauma at times, because she won't let him win. They are in a battle of wits, they are in a battle of attrition, but they also have this dance that they're doing together, which gets explored so beautifully and in so much rich detail as it goes back and forth from past to present, all the way through the novel. It's juicy, it's delicious, it's fascinating. Luke is such an exciting character, and he's so wonderfully villainous. He's a comic book villain, and I love that. And she has this kind of comic book hero energy about her, and I love that too. Meanwhile, Henry plays this broken kind of a kid, and he comes off as a bit toxic sometimes, kind of man-childish, and I love that too. There's so much to enjoy about these characters. They're really vibrant people. They do have a kind of campy, comic booky energy to them. The only problem that I have with the book, and it didn't hit me until towards the end, and I'm not going to spoil anything, is it's a bit too long. There are moments towards the end of the book which are running in place. A lot of chapters and sub-chapters are reinforcing the themes, ideas, and morals that have already been established. There isn't much else here. These are not expanding the story in any way. They are treading the same ground and running a groove into it. The theme of Addie living a miserable and difficult life because she is cursed is explored in a lot of detail, and it does progress. It does get better and worse, and you get more details and more examples of it, but there are moments toward the end where we're still running in place and we're still getting shown examples of her difficult life, and they don't mean anything. They're pretty hollow. 540 pages could neatly be cut into 500 exactly, maybe even a bit less. I feel like it could have done with a bit of an edit. There are definitely chapters that could just be chopped out and you wouldn't lose anything. That's the only thing that stops it being an absolutely perfect book, but in terms of how much I enjoyed it and how much I devoured it, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is a new favourite of mine. I like the fact that these are damaged people. I like the fact that they get at each other's throats a lot. And I like the mystery that unfolds slowly, especially about Henry, but also about Addie and her relationship to Luke. There's a lot of questions to answer, and they do get answered in a very satisfying way. The fact that it has this literary device of moving back and forth from past to present, and even from narrative perspective to narrative perspective as Henry gets introduced, and we get some chapters from his perspective too. There's a lot of diversity in the way that the story is delivered, which keeps it exciting, and you also are moving from place to place. The characters are what make this book such a wonderful success. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is a wonderful time. I really, really enjoy these characters, and I really enjoy their relationships and how damaged and broken they are. This original Faustian pact, which sets itself apart by being a woman who is escaping this heteronormative, I got that word on my brain right now, societal expectation kind of a life. The way that the past comes up to bite her, the way that the present comes forward to meet her, and the movement that we have between the past and the present keeps everything very exciting. And these are really complex and fun characters. They are campy and comic booky, but they're grounded at the same time and very, very, very relatable. The themes of her worrying about being forgotten or not being able to leave a mark on the world, these are all very, very relatable things. And at times this doesn't just feel like a Faustian novel, but an actual rewrite of Dr. Faustus, which was also a rewrite of Faust, I think. I love this book. I love it to pieces. It is a new favourite, and I don't know how long it'll be before I read it again. I don't think it's going to be a very long time. I'm probably going to want to restart it pretty soon, even though it's chunky and I don't have much time for chunky books these days. Please give this a read if you haven't. I loved it. And I'm probably leaving out a lot of thoughts because this is one of those wanky videos where I just burst at the seams rather than saying anything too concrete. You know, I like to be analytical. I don't know how analytical I've been here. There's just so much to love, except it's a bit too long. All right, I'll leave it there before I explode. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is really good. Subscribe for books.